So thank you everybody for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Maria Diaz, and I'm the president of Industrial and Systems Engineers in the Miami chapter. And as the president of the Miami chapter, you know, I'm always passionate about everything that has to do with engineering and industrial engineering and process improvement. So Joe is a very good friend of mine. I met through the Institute of Industrial Engineers a couple of years ago. So I never to do an event with Joe, but given the current situation we are in, I thought, hey, what better way to collaborate and, you know, close those boundaries and anything else that is provided by the physical distance. And now with the new trend, I say, let's jump in. Let's not have this of not being able to be socially present at the same room. Let's not make this a obstacle for us to be, you know, to let this chapter die. No, no, no. Let this be our motivation in order to introduce something new, to introduce some change, and, you know, learn what Joe has to say. You know, I've heard this talk several times in the conference, and I say I'm pretty sure my Miami people would love to hear what Joe has to say. So thank you, Joe, for joining us, for accepting this invitation.
My pleasure. My pleasure, Maria. Thank you very much for having me. And, you know, hats off to you and your efforts in the IISE Miami chapter.
Thank you, sir. It's all yours.
As Maria said, this is, she's seen this talk a couple of times. It's actually one of my more favorite talks, mostly because it's fun. But as we'll see later on in the presentation as an open discussion or as a discussion point, it's actually pretty applicable to what we're living through right now. In fact, it's a model for climbing Mount Stupid. So a little bit about me, a very little bit about me. This slide will be available later, so I won't get into it too much. But I own a couple of platforms, Zonatech, a consultancy, the Operational Excellence Society, a think tank, the Readiness Institute, which is a training and education platform that I launched 2 years ago. I'm on a couple of boards. I got a lot of plate spinning. But you know, that's it in a nutshell. And I did publish a book a couple of years ago called State of Readiness, which is actually quite a timely topic. It's not about just continuous improvement and process improvement. It's about how to make or have a company behave better and act better as a company, as its entirety. So not just vertical optimization, but horizontal integration. We always plan for things that are for when they're going right, but how does your organization react when the unplanned occurs? How does it react? As Mike Tyson says, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Well, a lot of companies have been punched in the mouth over the last couple of months. How has the organization been reacting? So, state of readiness. Most people like it. Maybe you will too. Our topic for today is lessons from Mount Stupid. And the conversation for when you know you're about ready to climb Mount Stupid, the conversation goes something like this. Senior leadership comes up to you and says, we need to drive another 5% EBITDA over the course of the next year. Can you do it? Or it might be some other very daunting task that they ask you if you can do it. And of course you say, being professionals and being capable, you say, absolutely it can be done. And they'll respond and say, well, super, what do you need? And your response is naturally going to be, well, I need resources, I need budget, I need time, I need, you know, access. And they're going to respond that you can't have any of that. You know, can you still do it? Your natural response is going to be, I can try. You know, they're not very happy with you saying you could try. And they're going to say, listen, if you can't do it, we could give it to Jones and let him do it. And you say, no, of course I can do it. Welcome to Mount Stupid. Now let's deconstruct this conversation a little bit. Your senior leadership, your management, your team lead is asking you to do something and asking if you can do it. And you are a trained professional, you are capable of doing it, assuming so, and you say, of course I can do it. All right, you're making that commitment. Of course I can do it. And they'll ask you, what do you need? And you, again, being the professional, tell them what you need in order to successfully complete your task. And they tell you that it's not available. Can you still do it? And you say, I can try. And they're not comfortable with you saying you can try. They want a commitment. They want a commitment from you, but you're not making the commitment or getting the commitment from them. But yet you say, of course, I can do it, because you don't want to say no. Well, the reason this conversation is so perilous is a fewfold. First off, you're setting yourself up for failure. All right, you said you needed all this stuff, and now you're going to try to do it without, and you're destined for failure. You're going to fail on that task, even though you committed to it. But the second, more chronic challenge here is that you asked for something, and then you committed without it anyway. That means that whenever you ask for something for the rest of your career, they're going to instantly assume that you don't need it. So, the chances of you getting support is going to diminish over time if you continue to have these conversations. So my strong suggestion to you is to make sure that if you say that you need something in order to accomplish a task, assuming that you actually meant it, and they deny it, let Jones do it and let Jones fail. Okay? At the end of the day, that's going to be the bad mark on Jones and not on you. So just a little bit of guidance there. Or if you in fact dig your heels in and say, listen, I need this stuff, they're going to respect you for it. So don't be like this OpEx guy in this conversation. So in order to understand Mount Stupid, we have to start with the Hegelian Dialectic. And the Hegelian Dialectic is a way of reasoning by William Hegel way back in the ancient times here in Germany. And by the way, I'm living in Frankfurt, Germany, broadcasting you live from Frankfurt, Germany. So on the horizontal axes, we have a thing called realizations. And it starts with frenzied and goes to cerebral. And on the vertical axes, we have expectations from low to high. And the curve looks like something like this. Now, some of you might recognize this as the Gartner hype curve. Well, Gartner borrowed it from Hegel, unless Gartner was more hundreds of years ago than Hegel. But it all starts off with a thesis. The thesis is a new way. This is a new way of doing things. And eventually, our enthusiasm exceeds our ability to execute. The reality doesn't live up to the dream or the hype. And this is where eventually unsustainability is unmistakably apparent. So if we think about like well, some of you might not be old enough for this, so I'll use a more contemporary one. The housing bubble of 2000, from 2002 to 2006. The housing bubble, people thought that their homes were going to increase in value 5 to 7% year on year forever. When the historical record was less than 1% year on year. So all of a sudden, we go from 1% year on year to 7% year on year. They're on paper, on property, they're becoming wealthier and wealthier. And the banks are more than happy to give loans because 7% year on year, their loans are safer and safer and safer. The banks became so confident in this new model that they started handing out a thing called ninja loans. Ninja loans were no income, no job or assets. If you had a house and you wanted to buy a house, it didn't matter what you had, the bank is going to give you the loan because they figure in 2 years, 3 years time, they're going to have the 20% equity in the house that they need. Well, eventually this model, the unsustainability of this model was obviously and readily apparent, and people started defaulting. And this is where the antithesis comes in. The antithesis is we're not going to loan to anybody. Okay, this is so harsh. We're so completely mistaken that we're going to get into the fetal position, find a dark corner, and suck our thumb and play it safe. We're not going to go out there anymore. So that's the antithesis. But then practicality and pragmatism sets in, and we say, you know what? People need to borrow we need to lend. We can't just sit on money that's idle. It's not going to make the bank any money. It's certainly not going to help the people realize their ambitions. We have to start lending, but we have to start lending in a much more pragmatic way. And then we find synthesis, which is a new way, a melding of the old way and its backlash in forming a new way forward. So this is a Hegelian dialectic. It starts with a new way, an unsustainability that's realized because you don't know what you don't know, a backlash against that, pragmatism, and then sustainability. So if we think about our OpEx or CI programs, you think about the program launch phase. At the bottom, we have value realized. We're going to realize value over time. And on the vertical axis, we have level of improvement. And the curve looks something like this. And that curve represents the value realized by the improvement resource or team, assuming just one team. Okay? So whatever's under that curve is what incremental value is realized. Now, at the beginning, we have great enthusiasm for this program as the low-hanging fruit is harvested. Okay, it's very easy. We're making big bangs up front. Everybody's very excited. But eventually, we get a level of frustration as an apogee is reached. There's only so much low-hanging fruit before you have to get out the ladders and the bucket and go for the higher stuff that's a lot more difficult to realize. And we're still making value. We're still creating value, but it's a much slower pace. Now, where the challenge here is at this very beginning, there's a lot of excitement, a lot of enthusiasm. And we start thinking, you see that very beginning, the very beginning of the curve has a very steep incline. And we start telling everybody that our rate of return is going to be like this forever. We make commitments to management. Yeah, we drove that 1% EBITDA in the first quarter. Man, we banked a lot of bucks in that first quarter. The second quarter, same thing. Now we're doing it twice as much because we've got some momentum. And the first projects of the first phase or quarter that spilled into the second one are being realized. And now it's like, wow, look at all the value we're driving. And we're telling management that we're going to be able to give you that X amount of return per year just on our resources. But eventually that dries up, and now you're not able to deliver that return as you did in the beginning. So people talk about CI and OpEx programs failing. I've never seen a CI or OpEx program fail, ever. I've never seen a CI or an OpEx program make things worse off than when they started. Maybe you have. It's not been my experience. There's always been improvement. Okay? Where OpEx programs fail is they fail to realize the expectations they've set to senior leadership. So those expectations were incorrect. Or there's a likelihood also that they didn't set those expectations at all. They focused on inputs, not outputs. When I say inputs, they said our OpEx program needs 100 green belts and 20 black belts. That's what it needs. Why does it need it? Why does it need that training? That's nothing against training. You can't have a high-performance organization without a high-performance team consisting of high-performance individuals. But why do you need that number and that configuration of expertise? I'll give you an example. I was working with a oil company in the Middle East, a state-run oil company in the Middle East, and their OpEx director lamented to me that he had spent and invested an enormous amount of money in certifying 60 black belts, and they hadn't completed a project, basically zero return on investment. Now, let's put aside for a second the fact that you can't be a black belt, at least in my world, without completing at least one project, and they completed none. Okay, let's put that aside for just a second. That gentleman was building inventory for which there was no need. It's basically violated Lean 101. He was building inventory without a need. He was not creating a pull on the resources in order to build and create that capability. So when we're building our programs, we have to be very, very conscientious of not focusing on the inputs, what's required, focus on what's desired, the outputs, and let that create the pull on the necessary inputs. So, Dunning-Kruger effect, formulated by a couple of professors at my beloved Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, and their horizontal axis is wisdom. Going from know nothing to guru, and wisdom I define as knowledge plus experience. And vertically, we have confidence from low to high. And again, we see the same Hegelian dialectic, Gartner hype curve. And it starts off with our program launch. And our program launch has the initial trajectory of our previous screen, very, very steep. And we think that we could deliver and deliver and deliver, and we don't know what we don't know. As Donald Rumsfeld famously said once, there's known unknowns and there's unknown unknowns. We don't know what we don't know. Then we reach the peak of Mount Stupid. This is where our lack of knowledge and our lack of understanding can no longer be hidden. It's completely and readily apparent. And we fall off the peak of Mount Stupid. I call this the cliff. And this is our program termination zone. This is where the leadership says you're not delivering on what you said you were going to deliver. You're frustrated because you didn't, you're discovering now what you didn't know. You're questioning your capabilities and your knowledge. And eventually we end up in the valley of despair. Now, if you're the OpEx professional that has fallen off the cliff, you get to the valley of despair, and this is where you're sitting there in the dust, and you're thinking, is this even what I like to do? Am I going to dust myself off, learn from my lessons, and go forward with this new wisdom? Or am I going to give it all up, move to Sedona, Arizona, and sell spirit stones to the tourists? Now, assuming that you decide to embark or re-embark on your chosen career, we climb the slope of enlightenment, and we reach a plateau of sustainability. Now, how might this be applicable today? Think about what we're going through today, COVID-19, right? We don't know what we don't know. It's obvious that individuals, institutions, governments, leaders are climbing Mount Stupid, okay? They don't know what they don't know, right? We see that in contradictions, wear the masks, don't wear the masks, wear the masks. They are effective, they aren't effective. Well, they're sometimes effective. You really need a mask, but if you don't have a mask, you could use a bandana. Shelter in place, go out. I mean, what's the reality? The reality is nobody knows what the reality is. Everybody's experimenting. This is a rolling experiment. A drug will work, a drug won't work. So, we're at the peak, and we are falling right now off the peak of Mount Stupid. And when I say we, I mean the collective of society and civilization is falling off the cliff of Mount Stupid, because what we don't know is readily apparent, and there's challenges that are being faced that are going to be eventually resolved, but haven't been resolved. And eventually, we're going to get to the valley of despair. This is like we're beaten down, but you know what? We have a direction. We know enough now. We've collected and analyzed enough data. We have enough field experience to actually start making incremental and logical choices. We climb up the slope of enlightenment. And then when we're at the peak, then we reflect and we're able to move forward. Now, the reflection is going to be incredibly important. And I would guess that this pandemic is going to feed academia and scholars and analysts for decades. How did it happen? What did we do wrong? What could we have done better? I'm sure there's going to be a lot of enthusiastic discussion. But COVID-19 is going right through the lessons from Mount Stupid right now. We're still learning those lessons. So if we think about time, though, think about our intrepid explorer that has fallen off of Mount Stupid, understanding what they don't know. Time on the horizontal axes, and we have knowledge on the vertical axes. And the curve looks something like this: this is what I think I know. what I think I know up front, we think we know a lot more than we do. You think about when you graduated from college, and you had all of this book smarts, and you went to your first job, and all of a sudden, what you didn't know became apparent that it was a lot. But over time, you realize that what you know is less and less. All right, so initially you think you know more than you do, and over time you realize that what you know is less and less and less. In the whole wide world, what you actually know is less. But over that same period of time, what you actually know is increasing. Okay, because every day we're learning something new. You folks are learning something new today, hopefully. Later on during the questioning, somebody might ask me a question or share some bit of wisdom with me that I didn't know, and I will have learned something. Maria asked me once, why do I go to these conferences? I mean, other than meeting great people and having great conversations, it's really about apples and ideas. What does that mean? Like, if I have an apple and you have an apple and we exchange apples, we each walk away with one apple, right? But if I have an idea and you have an idea and we exchange ideas, we each walk away with two ideas, right? So this is what I mean by this cumulative effect of what you do know increases over time. What you think you know decreases over time, because you realize every day that what you don't know is a lot. And when those two things intersect, that's what I call the humility threshold. This is when you become the mentor. When you realize this and you embrace this and you're comfortable with this, this is when you become the mentor. This is when you become Yoda. So what do you need to do? You need to remember that pride goeth before the fall. Okay, that's the first thing. Try to check your pride. Pride produces nothing positive. It also means control your ego. Remember, we're supposed to be humble servants. It's not about us. It's about them. It's about the organization. It's about helping others. Recognize that what you don't know is a lot, and it's always going to be that way. And question the wisdom when asked to. Don't let anybody just feed you the information and tell you this is the way it is. I mean, think about what we're going through now with COVID-19. If 20 people die and the headline reads apocalypse, okay? I mean, it's tragic, absolutely. Is it an apocalypse? I mean, there's 5 billion or 6 billion people on the planet. 20 people die someplace every day. Some people get sick every day. Is it apocalypse? Question what you're being told against your core beliefs. And this is a piece of advice my father gave me when I was younger. Never be the smartest person in the room. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. I don't believe that I'm successful because I'm the smartest person. I believe that I'm successful because I know what I don't know, and I seek the people that know what it is that I don't know, so they can do that work. There's some people that say, well, geez, we want to be able to learn everything. Well, I'll give you an example. I love golf. Love to play golf. Love to, spend a couple hours on the course, have a couple of beers, have some good conversation with some buddies. Love golf. No matter how much I practice golf, no matter if I hit a dozen buckets of balls every day, even if I was younger, there's no way I would have been on the PGA Tour, because I just don't have that skill. There was a Dos Equis commercial years ago. Remember, the world's most interesting man, and he'd sit there in his mahogany office or den, nice leather chair, and there was always some sort of lesson in these commercials. And this particular lesson was on careers. So it's going to be a 15-second spot lesson on careers, and the camera zooms in to the world's most interesting man, and the interesting man looks at the camera and says, find out in this life what you don't do well, and then don't do that thing. Wiser words were hardly ever spoken. And then change the emphasis from the inputs to the outputs. Doesn't matter what it takes, it matters what it makes. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this first presentation from the Systems Institute of Industrial and Systems Engineers, Miami chapter. Maria, thank you for having me again. And if there's any questions I'd be or conversation, I'd be happy to engage.
Thank you, Joe, for your time and for doing this presentation for us.
My pleasure.
Give me 1 second.
So I'm going to stop my share so we can have a dialogue.
Okay, now we see you. So if you have any questions for Joe, this will be a good moment for you to unmute yourself and ask the questions, because I don't see anything in the group chat yet.
Okay, Joe, maybe I'll go first. I've been to the top of Mount Stupid many times, not from my own, I like to believe not from my own fault, but I think really what you're kind of addressing there is, the role of sponsorship, or as I like to use the metaphor, being knighted by leaders when you're taking on a continuous improvement or change type project. But ultimately it comes down to culture, right? What have you seen through your travels? What kind of cultural gaps have you seen or are seeing out there, and how have you been addressing that with your clients, or how are you recommending other folks on the call kind of address it with their companies?
Well, culture's a big thing, right? And by the way, I think everybody, I think that if the person claims that they've never climbed Mount Stupid, they're climbing it now. I guarantee. I mean, think about it, Jim, when we were younger, our parents would say, don't ride the bicycle with no hands. And next thing you know, you're saying, look, ma, no hands. We've all climbed Mount Stupid, mostly when we're younger and discover gravity, or rediscover it, or discover it for ourselves. But culture is incredibly important. You have to have a culture of leadership. And, I talked about that servant leader. I talked about becoming Yoda. You know what I mean? Where you check your ego and people start coming to you openly. It's not about, as leaders ourselves, it's not about us, it's about them. And when we're first starting in our careers, or even in a new job, we're thirsty for knowledge, and we have to be able to ask for that wisdom. You know what I mean? I did a project in Russia. It lasted, 5 years or so. And in Russia, they have a culture of punishment. And what that translates to is that, and this is by and large, a lot of the country. It goes back to, history. If they make a decision and it's wrong, they get punished. As a employee or a leader of a company, if you make the wrong decision, I'm not even talking about outright crimes. If you make the wrong decision, you could go to jail.
Whoa.
All right. And what that means is that nobody makes a decision, certainly not a very critical decision. So the Russians become expert firefighters, because the crisis breaks out and it's nobody's fault, but they all rally to fighting the fire. So, reeling it back into more Western, companies and countries, we still have those people that think about command and control. And there are companies that, think about, building the capacity and capability of their staff, of their resources. They're going to invest properly in them. They're going to be supportive of them. This is not to say that, you invest in a person that is a hopeless laggard, okay? Because think about me. I have a team of 10 people, all right? I'm a leader. I have to try to parse my energy and my attention across the 10 people. And if one person starts taking up 80% of my energy, they're actually stealing energy from the others. And eventually we have to make the decision that if we can't fix that person's got to self-select out, or we select out. They got to depart. They got to terminate their existence with our organization. Okay. I know we hate to do it. I've owned a company since 1985. I've had to, terminate people over that course of time. I've had people leave over that course of time, as natural it would be. That very first person I ever released, man, I had knots in my stomach. I threw up. You know what I mean? I was just anxious. It was just a sick feeling, okay, just to have to do it. It had to be done, though, because I could see that they were dragging the performance of the rest of the team down, and I couldn't fix it anymore. So, the culture is very, very important. How do we adapt? How do we communicate? Are we afraid to communicate? I did a conference just recently with the utility company. I was doing a workshop, electric and gas company in upstate New York. And their motto for the year, this year's theme, was always ready. Okay, and I thought it was, of course, I thought it was a great theme because I'm all about readiness. But they shared with me that they had a couple of accidents last year that caused the death of a couple of their linemen. Okay, they're gas employees, and their sub motto or their slogan was, "We want you to go home the same way you came in." I thought that was a really, really smart, succinct, really, really had a lot of gravity to it. But it was so succinct and so simple that everybody could get their head around it. I want to go home today the same way I came in. So, culture is a big thing. And if you get into a situation where you're not getting the support that you need, it's an autocratic or political environment, you got to leave. You just got to leave. You're not going to fix it. Okay, you can't fix that unless, of course, you have that leadership position. If you're inserted above the politics and the discourse and the autocracy, then you can fix it. But if you're beneath it, you can't fix it. Your real only option is to endure or leave. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thanks, bud.
Does anybody have any more questions for Joe while we have him on the call? Stacy, you look like you want to ask a question. Don't be shy.
We got a couple of other folks from Europe here. Stefan, how you doing?
I'm fine, and you? How are you?
Yeah, not so bad. Welcome. How you been keeping?
Thanks.
I actually just wrote up the review for The Last Outliers, and I was reflecting on the challenges that you living in France have with this COVID-19. And what caught my attention in particular was that you said something about when you go out, you have to keep a log of when you leave the house and when you go back, and you're only allowed an hour outside. Is that true, or was that true?
You have to put the time on the form when you are leaving. And now they have on the form, and they are developing an app you can fill on the app. And I imagine they are not destroying all the data from the app. No one knows, but I can imagine that's because you are normally allowed to go once or twice out per day, except if you are working in a essential service like being a nurse or a GP or whatever. All those activities that still need to be run in the country in those times.
Yeah. So are things improving? What do you think about my take on the COVID-19 in Mount Stupid?
I fully agree. I was reflecting, if you ever heard the story of the chloroquine.
Of the what?
It's the chloroquine. There was a French guy in Marseille that decided to study that chloroquine could cure the COVID-19 and, got big titles. To the extent that even Donald Trump went to cite chloroquine as the miracle drug in one of his statements. And you realize that basically it was the beginning and a lot of people didn't know anything about the whole system. It was just a small trial and basically rushing quickly into conclusion, being very optimistic. Yeah. And now you come to realize, and today the Minister of Health of France have released a statement that further studies have concluded that chloroquine is more dangerous than helping for COVID-19, and ultimately people should not get and rush to get it because there is problem for heart condition and so on and so forth. So it's exactly the most stupid story to me.
Yeah,
big confidence.
I think it's okay to experiment. I mean, I guess this is the thing about Mount Stupid. It's okay to experiment. Okay, I mean, was it stupid for him to try, or the mefloquine or whatever it was, the quinine derivative, was it stupid or irresponsible of them to test it or try? Absolutely not. I think it was prudent. I would try anything. You know what I mean? If it had a reasonable expectation, or the expectation was based in reason, I should say. But I wouldn't, immediately say, well, this one instance is promising, therefore it must be successful, and I'm going to replicate it everywhere. That's the Mount Stupid part. I mean, exactly. I think it's very important to, scientific experiments as quickly as possible, of course. And if things are promising, then you accelerate the investigation, because you want to come to a conclusion, whether that's a proper course or an invalid course, as quickly as possible, so you can get on to the next thing. But yeah. So thanks for that.
Hey, Joe, given that you're a pond hopper between Europe and US, what are you hearing from your clients? How's COVID-19 impacting Europe versus the US? Any differences? Any significant differences worth talking about?
Yeah, there are a lot of significant differences. I mean, the countries where it hit heavy and hard, quick, early on, like Italy and Spain, they were woefully unprepared. They were on the front lines. They were cannon fodder, as they would say in 1800 warfare, and they suffered greatly. By the time in France also was caught on their back heels. The Germans initially were caught on their back heels, but they came out with a bunch of what I'll call measured responses. Like here, we can go out and do whatever we want. I could go out as many times as I want during the day, go to the grocery stores. Of course, all the restaurants, the bars, the beer gardens, much to my chagrin, are closed. In fact, just yesterday, they canceled Oktoberfest for this year. If you're a football fan, you can't go to the stadiums to watch the teams play, but I guess the teams are still going to play their season. I don't know how that would work out. But the Germans insist on social distancing. And the one thing I got to say about being in Germany, they're all about the rules. We have a green bin for paper. We have 4 bins for our garbage. Yellow is for recyclables, and everybody uses them pretty much religiously. People will clean their cobblestones of weeds by being on their hands and knees with a screwdriver digging out the weeds. So they're very, very orderly here. And if they say stay 2 meters apart, they stay 2 meters apart. I drove by a store that just opened just recently. They opened up, they allowed shops that are 800 square meters in size or less to open up. So you don't see the the big box stores still or anything like that. But the smaller shops, and of course salons are closed. But as I was driving by the store, there's a line to get into the store, all right? And there's a distance of 2 meters-ish, maybe more, there is not less, between the individuals going into the store. And people are going in, doing their thing, and leaving. But what caught my attention was that there were no markings on the sidewalk. No little boxes, no little circles for people to judge where that spot should be. They just know to do it, and that's what they do. So that's a big difference here. There, in Germany at least, there's a standard that's being established. I don't see standards being established in the States, so it's going to be harder, I believe, to actually figure out what worked. If we get ahead of it, is it because people all of a sudden opened for business, or is it because of all the work that was up front that people shut everything down? It's going to be harder to derive a conclusion from that.
It'll be because of Trump, one way or the other, right?
Of course.
That's where we're at as a country right now. One way or the other, it'll be his fault or his
or both,
saved us
or
all.
both.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll be dependent on who you're talking to. I mean, that's
right, exactly.
That's the brilliant part of our U.S. democracy is that even when you're right, you're wrong, and even when you're wrong, you're right.
Exactly.
Thanks, everybody. So give me your best smiles. I don't want to see nobody with a serious face. I mean, we just had the pleasure of listening to Joe and sharing all his knowledge with us. So everybody should be very happy and very engaged. Yes, I like it, Genesis. All right. I like it, John.
Okay, are we done?
Go. 1, 2, 3. All right.
All right.
Okay,
Super duper.
I'm gonna post all of this in our social media. So if you have not connected with us yet, feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook. We are the IISC Greater Miami chapter. Also, if you were not able to join at the beginning, don't worry, because this webinar is being recorded and it's also going to be posted on YouTube.
And so, Maria, I'd like to thank you again for having me here, and you know, all the best to you and the rest of the chapter of IISE Miami. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe. We appreciate you taking some of your busy time to share your vast knowledge with us. Thanks. From the bottom of the heart here, you know.
Thanks, Joe. Good seeing you, buddy.
Yep, likewise, Jim. We have to get on the phone sometime here.
Yeah, for sure. Talk soon.
All right. Cheers, guys.